Welcome, everyone, to the Commercial Real Estate Library podcast. I am your newest host, Stefan Morissette, Vice President with Colliers International in Vancouver, BC. I'm the new West Coast host. And with me today is Todd Yuen, President of Beedie. Todd joined Beedie just over 12 years ago. He's responsible for build-to-suit, acquisitions, planning, sales, and leasing. Todd, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Stefan. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So obviously we've known each other for 13 years now. You left Colliers 13 years ago to join Beedie, basically right after I started. Maybe you could give us a little bit of context around who Beedie is for people listening who don't know you and don't know Beedie. What's the story around the company? How did it get from when Keith started it, many decades ago to today? And just a bit synopsis on the company.
Sure. So I know I'm going to get this date wrong, but the company was started, I'm going to say it's 67 years ago now, in and around that time frame by our current president. I should say I only have purview over our industrial group. There's a lot of other facets of the Beedie organization that I don't have oversight or necessary direct involvement in. But the business was started by Keith Beedie, who's Ryan's father. And Mr. Beedie literally started the business and started building garages as a means to house and feed his family at the time. And one day, Mr. Beedie was building, I believe it was an automotive repair facility, and he literally had the notion in his head. He said, if I kept this building instead of just building these and selling these and maintained an income stream, this might work out for me. And lo and behold, he's literally started acquiring slowly but surely pieces of land. He started developing on them. And whenever possible, his philosophy was he wanted to keep these assets for long-term income growth. And so I've been here for 13 years, and I think Ryan stepped in to become president of the company in and around 4 or 5 years prior to that. So Ryan was quite a young man at the time when he came in to join his father at the business. And it was really through Ryan's stewardship that the business really started to evolve. It was at that time that they started acquiring large industrial land plots and really started driving the growth of the business throughout, at that time, Metro Vancouver. And the evolution of the business from there has really been slowly but surely. The focus has always been on industrial. I think if you ask Ryan, there's a part of him that thinks of Beedie as being just as much a construction company as it is a development company. And, I think we take a lot of pride in our construction history and what we've delivered to the market. We've got people around here who've been with the organization for 30 plus years. So the business now sits at a total industrial inventory that's owned by Ryan of personally of about 11 million square feet now throughout the country. We do have assets down in the United States as well. But I think really the most astonishing or amazing story about Beedie is how the business has continued to evolve. So while industrial has always been, and I believe always will be, our core, somewhat selfishly said, we now have a very, very robust residential group with a lot of active projects throughout Metro Vancouver, primarily towers, but we also do townhomes and some low-rise. Ryan has a merchant banking arm that he's now heavily involved in. So, through just natural evolution and growth, the business has gone from being a very humble family-owned business to still being a very humble, but I would say much more substantial family-owned business.
That's great. And I mean, you started, 13 years ago now. How in the more recent term have you seen it evolved kind of from when you began to today? You've grown from being a fairly substantial developer 13 years ago to being literally the leading one in British Columbia and now across Canada. How have you seen it evolve more recently?
Yeah, I think the evolution has just been on project scale, right? And Ryan always likes to tell me that the size or at least the complexity of the projects are no different than what they were before. And as an employee, I always nod my head in agreement. But I would say that if you look at the types of things that Beedie is touching now and the types of deals we're doing, I think we've grown as the market has grown. Even in the 13 years I've been here, 60,000 feet, 80,000 feet was a big deal for us, right? If we landed an 80,000 square foot build-to-suit, we were pretty excited about it. So, we might do 5 or 6 of those a year back in 13 years ago when I started. So was that 2007 or no? Yeah, 2007. But now, we do on average between 1.5 million and 2 million square feet of new construction per year. And a lot of these deals, we're just coming off having finished 500,000 square feet for Sobeys. We're underway right now in a joint venture with Saputo for a state-of-the-art dairy facility. We built jet turbine repair facilities. And it's really the complexity stuff that I think really distinguishes the types of deals that we're doing now than from what we did when I started. Even back when we started, our specification booklet that would accompany our deal might be 10 pages long. We have some of these group now that send us 200 pages of detailed specs and drawings that need to get incorporated. So it's really the people power that we need to manage and to figure our way around these deals, particularly given, we're now dealing with the FedExes of the world and the Sobeys and the Saputos and other large groups with very strict criteria. It's certainly kind of changed what we need to apply to a deal in order to make it happen.
Right. Something else that you guys were a bit of a pioneer in on the strata side, some people call it condominium warehouses. Typically 10 years ago when I started, you'd see 2,000 to 3,000 square foot bays being built only. Obviously, given supply constraints in our local market, there was an opportunity to build 10 to 20,000 square foot bays. You've now become the leader in the development world for that type of product. What was the thinking around that back then, and how have you seen that progress over the last decade?
Yeah, I can't take a lot of credit for it. I was actually back at my alma mater, your current shop at Colliers at the time, and it was a project down in South Burnaby. There was no industrial strata at the time. It exists in 2,000 square foot bays, and Ryan said, "I take this 5 acres, a 4.7 acre chunk," and he goes, "I'm going to build 90,000 feet, and I'm going to build the smallest unit at 8,000 or 9,000 feet." And the market literally said to him, "You're nuts, right? This will not work. People won't pay the freight." At that time, I believe we sold the first 2 bays at $135 a foot down in South Burnaby. And I think those units would trade, and you know better than me, but probably north of $350 a foot in those range right now for that type of product. And I think strata started in Vancouver, at least in the large format. And I think it started because of Ryan and has since swept across the country. It's now being undertaken in Toronto now. And it was really just a recognition of scarcity. I think Ryan at the time, he looked at the market, and his commentary to me when we were talking about how we would bring this forward and introduce it to purchasers, he said, if you're a buyer looking to own 10, 20, 30,000 square feet, you literally have no opportunities to buy anything in Vancouver right now. It didn't exist. It wasn't in like some markets where you go buy a 1/2 acre of land or a 1/4 acre and build your building on it. That wasn't a possibility in Vancouver. So he said, if we give people value, if I build these to the same quality as we build our leasehold product and I sell it, I think there's going to be a market there. So there was a bit of an education process for the lenders to understand what it was about and making sure that the appraisers understood how to value these assets. But I mean, right? You sell as many of these things as anybody in the market right now. It's really been a cornerstone, I think, for certain the Metro Vancouver industrial market and the growth of our market. It's certainly had an impact on land pricing over the last little while.
Yeah, and that's a great segue to my next question. I mean, values on land as well as lease rate value have been relatively stagnant for the first kind of 6 or 7 years of the decade. And in the last 3 years, we've seen year-over-year appreciation 10 to 20% on both price per square foot, land value, as well as lease value. Given current economic trends that we'll touch on later, where do you think it's sustainable for these values to continue to grow in the near to midterm, and where do you see things heading going forward locally, I guess, and as well in Ontario?
I mean, I'm fairly conservative by nature, and Ryan is quite bullish by nature. I come from a fairly old school and industrial brokerage mentality, and that industrial is not like other sectors, right? It's certainly not like retail where you're prepared to pay whatever premium you have to secure the right location for a retailer, right? You know, a lot of these businesses going into these strata units in some cases are lower margin businesses dependent on volume, certainly responded to the economy. But I mean, year after year, you know, your stats hit it on the head. We see exponential growth in valuations, in land values, and lease rates. And I can tell you that throughout COVID, we continued to transact in all of our strata markets across the country with no degradation in pricing whatsoever, right? And I think that's really a testament to you know, a lot of businesses looking longer term than just the immediacy of the impact of COVID. But beyond that, I think it speaks to within certain market segments, people recognizing that, you know, ownership and controlling your costs still has a ton of value for people. And there's no question that I think the strata market has benefited hugely by the massive surge in lease rates that we've had in a little while. You know, I literally, it wasn't that long ago when lease rates for, you know, 30, 40,000 square feet were like $7, $8, $9 a foot, right? And now you're 12s, 14s, 15s, and beyond, depending on your geographic location. And I think that's helped to equalize value so that when people, and you know, it certainly doesn't help that we have such a low cost of borrowing right now. So when people are looking at the carry and the downstroke of the equity requirement to buy a strata unit versus, you know, paying someone rent at a deep double-digit rent, it's certainly helped drive the demand for strata.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with all that. So on the cap rate perspective, obviously, you know, interest rates have come off a little bit given COVID. You know, where would you put cap rates today? We haven't really seen many things transact recently. And where do you see them kind of trending over the next little while here?
I got asked this the other day, and I did this other discussion, and I wanted to talk to some people who are a lot more expert on this than I was. And I was talking to an individual who heads acquisitions for one of the major institutions in the country. And his comment to me was back in 08, 09, the outcome of that financial event was, you know, multifamily became the hallmark. It became whatever, you know, your stay-at-home defenseman that everyone wanted to own because it was safe, it was steady, and there was a big flooding of money into that market. The commentary that was made by this one individual, so, you know, take it with a grain of salt, but I think this individual is quite educated, was COVID made industrial the number one asset class. You know, particularly in BC, understandably, there was a lot of rental concessions for people who were put out economically. You understandably could not remove tenants who weren't paying their rent. There was rent abatements all over the place for residential tenancies because so many people were hurt so badly by COVID. Meanwhile, the industrial market internationally, including in China, just sailed along. And the logic behind that, or the rationale behind that, was quite obvious, right? It's, you know, your industrial, your warehouse is really your last line of defense. If you're a retailer, you know, it's pretty easy to look for a rental concession and perhaps not meet your lease obligations for your bricks and mortar retail presence. But you can't put the warehouse where you're storing your millions of dollars of inventory in jeopardy by being in breach of your lease position. So, you know, I think if you look at it statistically, throughout COVID, industrial fared the best out of all the asset classes. And I think that's done. And I think we've seen that just by virtue of the sheer number of phone calls I've had. Like, I consistently get calls asking whether Ryan is prepared to dispose of any of his assets, and my answer is always the same: no, right? But at some number, you know, everything has a price. But those calls have increased dramatically in the last little while because I think everyone who isn't in industrial is looking to get into it. People who are in it are looking to grow it. And I think by virtue of that, you know, we're going to see continued cap rate compression. It remains to be seen, but I've heard that there are a couple of assets out there where they're talking about getting to the mid threes or lower for institutional grade product. You know, and Ryan and I hear those numbers, and I mean, we do what you just did, right? Our eyes kind of go wide. Like, is this actually possible? Because we don't get it. But every time we've said that we weren't going to get to a low four, we get to a low four, right? I mean, you tell me. I don't think there's been anything in starting with a 3 of any scale yet to date. I could be wrong, but would it surprise me if a truly AAA asset moved at a 3.5? It wouldn't, right? It really wouldn't.
Wow. Well, that's great. I appreciate that. And no, the only time I can think of a sub 4 cap is with significantly under market rents. So
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and that's not what we're going to see today, I don't think. I'd love to hear from you. You dealt with some very interesting deals over the years. You touched on Sobeys being one of the larger ones you're working on right now or just completing. What's one of the most challenging or interesting deals you've worked on that you're able to share some insights about?
I mean, I think interesting. I mean, particularly for the audience, I think you mentioned that you have a fairly heavy brokerage-based audience on here. So I mean, as far as interest, deals are, I don't want to say they're standard, right? But the parameters and the dynamics around the deal are usually fairly typical throughout. So, you get all the standards that I'm sure everyone who would be paying attention to a podcast like this has likely seen before. But as far as most challenging, I think my answer would be the same as probably yours or any others. It's probably for a deal, well, I know it was for a deal that just didn't happen, right? It's, you put 8 or 10 months into it, you spend a good 6-figure number chasing after the deal, you negotiate a lease and it just implodes. And really, I was thinking about this because you kind of telegraphed that this question might be coming across the line. It's really just on a complete misalignment of values, expectations, a poor communication, or just the crap hitting the fan at the end of the day, and something completely out of left field blowing the deal up. But I mean, the deals that we're seeing right now are just by rule more interesting, just because, as I touched on before, they're just so complex, right? And the sophistication of the people we're dealing with is just at another level, right? So, a transaction manager or a real estate manager, and I'm sure you see this in your day-to-day life now. I mean, those people always had a role to play, but the skill sets and what they're bringing to the table and just their understanding of all facets of real estate, and then a deep understanding of the business as well that they're doing, it's at another level, right? And, the pressure is on, I think, us as developer, on you guys as members of the brokerage community to keep up, right? Because to be a value add in this market, it's tougher to do, that's for sure. But I mean, I think if you look at that Sobeys deal, I think that's a perfect example of how two groups pulling together really can make, not to sound cheesy about it, but a really positive result. I mean, that was a situation where Sobeys was consolidating into a number of operations into one location, and midway through the deal, they literally compressed the timelines by 6 months. So wow. We had a tight schedule as it was in order to meet that. And just because of some planning on the Sobeys end, they said, we need to be into this building 6 months earlier than we had originally scheduled. How do we do that? And our answer was literally like, you can't, right? I can't create 6 months out of a schedule out of thin air. But full credit to our development and to our construction teams. They looked at schedule, and they looked at, our development teams looked at a way that they could interact more directly with the city of Surrey to find a more proactive path to getting approvals in place. And we have to really credit the city in this one, and also our construction side, for just really coming up with creative solutions to meet those dates. And save for the 1 month we lost because of weather that was completely beyond our control, we were literally bang on to the day on time. So that was a huge win and a real testament to what kind of getting lucky and some hard work and some creative thought can do for a deal.
So speaking of trends in the market and construction, we're now going to see the first ever multi-story big bay warehouse in South Burnaby coming forward. I've heard there's rumors of one in Coquitlam. Have you looked much recently at the 2-story larger bay warehousing side of things? And is that something that Beedie is interested in going forward?
Yeah, we have. I mean, we've spent a lot of time doing it, and particularly in areas where, if you look down in Glen Lyon, which we have a big presence in, and you're talking about land values north of $4 million, you just have a requirement to try to find ways to make the sites more efficient and to squeeze density out of them to try to make the dollars make sense. And I'll be frank with you, Steph, the biggest problem we have is we can't make the numbers work, right? Like at this juncture, to build a 2-story warehouse building particularly in Metro Vancouver, where we have a lot of soft soil sites, right? So you've got seismic issues to deal with. You have all of those other factors that you have to consider. We can't make the yields work where to offset the additional costs of rooftop parking and all those other things we have to do in order to make it work. And my hat goes off to Oxford, right? I think if you could hook those guys up to a lie detector test, I think they would tell you that they're super excited about this project, but they've just got the financial capacity to kind of give this a shot. Right. But I don't think anyone at Oxford, and I could be completely wrong about this, I don't think anyone at Oxford could tell you that this is going to be their best financially performing asset. But I think they're doing what leaders do, and they're trying something new and innovative so that they can learn from it and hopefully perfect the model. And then, I'll bet you the second one that they do will be even more successful than the first one. But, I think a bunch of things have to happen. Is we need to figure out some ways to find a way to be more efficient on the construction side before we're going to see that happen. And then lease rates are going to have to continue to trend upwards such that we can make the model work, so that we can make a return that's going to make sense for us as a developer, because we don't have the availability of capital like an Oxford would.
Makes sense. You touched on Ontario. You guys are doing a couple of new projects there.
Yep.
What is your take overall on the Ontario market? I know their vacancies similar to ours, extremely low and tight. What's your take on that market entering into it and going forward?
So, to be clear, our entry into Ontario is being, it's slow and cautious, right? Is the way we would look at it. And there's so many sophisticated, highly qualified and professional players out there. We're really being, prudent about not sticking our necks out too far. Where we see we can bring a value to the market in particular is on the condo side, right? Condos are not, anyone who does them can tell you they look easy to do from the outside, but they're not. I mean, you're building 100,000 square feet. They're tough to get financing for, and then you've got to work your way through them, and you're not always lucky enough to get pre-sales, right? And, you may have to build that full project and build it into completion, particularly in a new market like Toronto, before you actually start to get an uptake from the purchasing and the brokerage community out there. So, our thought out there is exactly what you just noted. They have a super low vacancy. It's a good dynamic in that it's hard to find product, it's hard to find good land sites, and it's really expensive. So there's a natural barrier to entry out there for a developer, and unless you're sizable, it's really hard to take the risk on of building one of those things. But if you're sizable, do you really want to do 100 or 150,000 square foot buildings when most sizable developers in Ontario literally will build 1 million square feet on spec at a time, right? So we see our opportunity in Toronto as being a nice little niche player, an experienced quality developer with hopefully enough name brand equity that a buyer in Toronto will recognize us from Vancouver because perhaps we've done business out there, and so that they have the confidence to perhaps pick up one of these units that they may own in Vancouver and would love to, and they own one in Calgary, and they'd love to own one in Toronto as well. And we've actually had a couple of examples of that in the last little while. So, we don't know necessarily what the future holds for us in Toronto. We think there's a huge amount of opportunity for us, but we're going to let that develop organically as well. We want to get some of these condo projects under our belt. We want to successfully deliver some projects. And we're really being careful not to bite off more than we can chew, right? We want to deliver properly on these first one or two projects, and we want to walk before we can run out there.
So you touched on Calgary. Speaking of Alberta, hit with a double whammy of oil dropping even lower than it was before, and then now COVID. You guys own quite a bit there and are developing out there. What are your thoughts on the Calgary and Edmonton markets?
So Calgary, and I made this comment to someone the other day, I think what COVID has shown is just the total resilience and character of the Albertan. Throughout COVID, we continued to sell condo units in Calgary. We ran a really aggressive marketing program out there that really that looked to kind of spur on the Albertan to say, just because you're down doesn't mean you're out. And we had this massive surge of sales in Calgary on the condo unit side. And again, like very little drop off in pricing in Calgary. Edmonton has been a little tougher. I don't know why. I'm fairly knowledgeable about Alberta, but no one can really tell me why Edmonton has been quite a bit softer than Calgary. We're only exposed to Edmonton in one project out there, and that one project we've pretty much come close to selling out the first phase, and we're going to proceed with the second phase to see what happens. But if you look at Alberta, I mean, it was in the papers the other day, or pardon me, Calgary. I mean, Lowe's just signed a 1 million square foot deal, right? So and I'm fairly familiar with all the bigger mandates out there, and there's a ton of activity in Calgary right now. So Calgary has certainly had a share of a tough run over the last little while, but in particular as it relates to Calgary, that industrial market has been fairly strong. And if you talk to the brokerage community out there, Calgary more so again than Edmonton, it's the market has certainly picked up, and guys are feeling a lot better about what the future holds for the industrial market out there.
Well, that's good to hear. Speaking of COVID, which we've touched on a couple times, we're recording this July 6, 2020, so about 4 months into, we never really got a lockdown here, but government restrictions, which are now being eased up and loosened. How, from a developer's and landlord's perspective, how have you seen COVID affect the industrial real estate market?
I think it's, as we touched on, it's made it stronger, right? I think there's a lot of, e-commerce, you just have to pick up pretty much any major periodical right now. It's talking about the importance of, warehousing to the e-commerce and logistics sector. I think if you talk to any big business that's dependent on imports from the United States or Europe or even China, I think a lot of people are looking at their supply chain and saying, I need to shore up my industrial and my logistics and my supply chain, because when the next pandemic hits, I don't want to be in a position where I don't have access to supplies or product. And then take that the next step to food, right? And food security. That's on everyone's mind right now. So, the importance of having good cold storage facilities and having dry warehouse facilities and having the ability for all of these grocers and producers and suppliers to get their product to the shelf. I think it's, what COVID has done for the industrial market is it's just kind of highlighted and bolded how warehouses, which really everyone knew was important, but didn't want to talk about or think about because it's not that sexy. It just made it realize, you really got to take care of that component of your business if you're going to continue to move forward during a pandemic.
Yeah, perfect. So, and more selfishly as a broker, and our audience is quite a few brokers as well. How do you think COVID's affecting the brokerage side of the business? What do you think, is changing?
I talk to a lot of brokers every day, and I think at the outset of COVID, I think it didn't matter where you were on the seniority scale, you were doing what everyone was doing. What does this mean? What is the impact going to be, et cetera, et cetera? And I think, in order to be successful as a broker now, you have to deliver value. And by that, and I always say this to anyone, any women or men getting into the business, is that you're not just transaction based, right? Your goal as a broker is to really make yourself like a trusted advisor of your clientele. And the people that I talk to, the brokers who I've been observing who have continued to thrive during COVID, are the people who have looked to not say to themselves, hey, what do I need to do to get a deal done? They've almost set the transaction side apart, and they've invested themselves in their clients to say, in this completely unforeseen time that no one knew or even fully understands yet, what can I do for you as a client to help you, A, make sure your business survives this, B, what can we do to help rationalize costs and drive efficiencies for you? And C, how can I help, right? And, and I'm not talking about help like, do you need to sublease, but, creating connectivity between other aspects of your business or even your life to say, hey, you've got an issue here. I know so-and-so that might be able to help you out with that. And through that thinking, I've seen a lot of guys turn that downstream into business, because those clients remember those types of things, right? Is that this broker wasn't just there for me during the transactional time. This individual, she was there for me when we were at our worst. And I think that from a brokerage perspective, as someone who's outside of the brokerage industry now, when I look at people who are actually succeeding on the brokerage side right now, they're taking a completely different attitude and perspective towards what's important in their business in order to be viewed as a trusted advisor in the business.
That's great advice, and I appreciate it. You guys came by our office pre-COVID and talked about some of the projects you're working on, and you brought by an Encyclopedia Britannica of I want to say 20 plus projects that you have underway.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about some of the larger projects, or one or two that you're most excited about going forward? Something that maybe is hot off the presses, or something that's coming down the pipeline with respect to a larger project size?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret, but we have our Parkwood project out in Delta that's coming out, and that's 135 net usable acres. We still have some approvals that we need to get through with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. Part of that project includes building an overpass over a 8-lane highway. So, I think it's the first time that collectively the province and a municipality and a private developer are going to engage in getting a major piece of infrastructure done together that Ryan is funding to make this business park a reality. But I'm pretty excited about that. I mean, all signs seem to point towards the fact that we are going to be successful in getting that fully approved. We have zoning in place right now, and I mean, you can probably tell me more, but I mean, I think if we were able, when we come to market with 135 net usable acres in a perfect rectangle, I think a lot of people are going to, I don't think that exists anywhere else right now. And it's in Delta, right? It's not, 2 hours outside of Metro Vancouver. It's in the heart of one of the major industrial municipalities in Metro Vancouver. So, that's pretty exciting for us. And I think beyond that, and I unfortunately can't speak too much about it, but we have kind of 2 or 3 other kind of landmark type deals that we're working on that are kind of in their infancy stages right now. But if we're fortunate enough to get those done, it could be a very exciting kind of couple, 3 years for us as a company.
Well, that is exciting. I guess that brings me to one of my last questions. From an acquisition standpoint, are you, on hold during COVID, or are you guys full steam ahead? And kind of what is your ideal property that you're out there looking for, across Canada from an acquisition standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give the bad, kind of tired, lame answer of, we're certainly a buyer out there right now. We're being more opportunistic about it. The one thing about industrial is I've seen no fall off in pricing whatsoever, right? Like, I think COVID has made, as we talked about, it's probably made yields worse. But there's been, and I think this is a testament just to the quality of who owns industrial real estate. But as you go across the country, at least sizable, whether it's income or land, all of that stuff is usually owned by someone who has a really low historical cost base, or is as big or if not bigger than Ryan's company is. So we've got our eye out looking for anything that we think would be a viable development opportunity. I mean, during COVID, we were very engaged at a $100 million plus income opportunity on the industrial side. We looked at 3 or 4 pieces of land. I'm just working on an LOI today for something. So we were admittedly very nervous when COVID started. We put a couple of projects on hold. We went for extensions on anything we had under contract, but everything that we kind of bumped out is now resuscitated again, and we feel that we've got enough comfort in the market that we can keep plugging forward, because it's difficult to say what's going to happen long term as a result of COVID. Just I think what's happening in the United States is a bit disconcerting for us. But I think long term, as it relates to the Canadian and in particular the Metro Vancouver or the Toronto industrial markets, we're feeling pretty good about what the future holds there.
Well, that's great. I think that's a good way to end it. So I really appreciate your time, Todd. That was super insightful, and a great conversation. So unless you have anything else to add as final thoughts, I want to thank you very much for spending the time with me today.
Thanks, Stefan. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was great.